We are joined now by Brian Christopherson of Husker 24/7. What's up, BC?
How you guys doing?
Oh, just working on my security, my sense of self-worth. Just a lot of mental exercise working with my partner these days. BC, how about you?
I could see.
You probably don't have to worry about that. You work with a bunch of solid guys, kind of uplifting.
Oh, Brunt's is sarcastic AF. Come on. And Shafe gets pettier than I do.
Yeah, we're not in person a lot, though. We're usually at our own houses working from a distance, so that probably helps things.
Yeah, you're not staring at him for 3 hours.
You gotta look at that guy's face 8 feet from you. That's tough.
So I stood with him for probably, 30 minutes with all these footballs flying around us.
Schaefer, not me.
On Friday. Well, I didn't really talk to you, but you were there too. But Friday at 7-on-7, like literal boots on the ground. I mean, this dude was taking notes, just writing his brains out on Friday, man. I was like, you know what? I kind of appreciate that vibe, Shafe. I like that about you.
Yeah, boots on the ground. That's good. Good to see that. I was not out there. I was in my air condition. So credit to you guys.
Hey, so we were talking.
It wasn't too bad out.
This is on the heels of, and I love that he said it. Coach Rule talking about, he made the comparison in evals with Ohio State, and when they do it and they get their 4 and 5 star guys on campus early, as freshmen and sophomore, they see them too. But when Nebraska does it, and I mean, the rest. And so, and I love that approach because he says, you know what, we evaluate as well as anybody. And I looked at that and I thought of it immediately with the run on offensive linemen that they had on campus, but are starting to trend or even commit so much to other places. And I'm like, is that going to have to be kind of the balance and the beauty of Nebraska's approach, right? You're going to swing for top guys. You're not going to shy away because you believe in what you do, but you're also going to have an eval process where you may actually get some guys that, and I hate to use Damon in the rough because he obviously kind of bristled up at that,
Yeah.
But like some guys that may be off the radar too, right? That's just going to kind of be their balance.
Yeah, that's part of it. Plus, it's just the ebbs and flows of recruiting. I mean, you use running back as an example. Like there's these stretches where it's like, what's going on there? Who's coming in? And then, you end up landing Parker. And, Mekhi Nelson's an interesting ad, kind of in a string of like a month. And so that changes the whole dynamic of the room. It feels like it does come in waves sometimes at a position. It's sort of like watching Minnesota Twins baseball. They'll win 7 in a row and then you lose 4 in a row. Sometimes you're in that streak where you have, 2 or 3 linemen that sign up in about a month span, and then you have that stretch where nothing's happening. But I was just looking at it because I know we really pumped up Donnie last week, and so then this week it's like, what's going on with Donnie? Because they didn't get those guys. And I was just to remind people though, okay, this is the 24 class. Grant Bricks, Gibson Pyle, Preston Tamua, Landon Davidson, Jake Peters, Rugaroli. That's 6 guys. 23, Gatula, Knutson, Sledge, Tyler Kanak, Ben Scott was a transfer addition. Jacob Hood was in there too. And Machachek is also, I believe, on the O-line now, if I'm thinking right on that. So that's...
Mazuka's in there.
Yeah, he is. Mazuka's in there. So with Mazuka in there, that's 14 names in the last, 2 cycles. So all I'm saying is if there's someone who's a little panicked today, and they're like, oh, man, what's happening with this class? I understand that. You can have that discussion. But it's not like that building over there isn't pretty heavy with a lot of, young prospects who are building right now. When you talk about positions where the numbers aren't, exactly wanting, I don't think it's necessarily the O-line. And if you think about even a year before the years I mentioned, Justin Evans comes in 1 year before that, and I think he's got some good football ahead for the Huskers. Obviously, you've got to, after this season, kind of work in who's the next in line after Ben Hart and Ben Scott. But for the most part, a lot of returners are coming back, you would think. So all in all, the O-line room is in pretty solid shape as far as the numbers go and the potential to develop. That's not to say you wouldn't love to add a big fish or two here still, and we'll just see how it plays out now.
BC, so to not put too fine a point on it here, you are not concerned that the sky is falling with the offensive line recruiting.
Well, I'm not, but I mean,
You're a child.
I don't mind.
You're
I
a
don't
child.
mind that. I don't mind that sometimes we have, we come in and have a discussion about like, hey, what's going on here? We're usually pretty positive about things within that program, I would say, in this media market. So I can understand when a few people are like, hey, what about this over here? And it'd be nice if they had landed one of those. I mean, I loved like John Mills. Like John Mills just looked like a Big Ten lineman to me the whole way, and he ends up at Texas. So you see a guy like him or Scholl, and you're thinking that would have been a nice add to what they've got, a nice compliment. So it is disappointing when Nebraska loses on some of those. But as Damon's point was well made, that's sort of the price of doing business when you're going up against the same type of linemen the other powerhouse schools are really in on. So it's you and like two or three really other good options. You're going to lose sometimes.
Yeah, and BC, I kind of joke, but I also think it's a little, people kind of talk out of both sides of their mouth where they're like, oh, why are we only going after these 3 stars or whatever? And then you go after the 5 stars and you're not going to land most of those. And then they're like, oh, what's happening? We're not getting any recruits. It's like it's sort of the other side of the coin there where it's like, hey, you're going to take some shots if you're going to go for higher end guys. Most of those guys aren't going to say yes. You sort of have to be able to deal with the quote unquote failure rate of going after big time guys. Especially if you don't want to sit here and just be like, oh, well, I guess we're going to develop some 3 stars, which I'm not even saying is a bad thing. It just seems like people those same people get frustrated about both ends of that spectrum.
Yeah, and kind of connected with that diamonds in the rough quote last week. I was talking with Caden.
I loved it.
Yeah, that was fun. And Caden Vermoss loved it too. I was doing an interview with him after his official visit. I like Caden's a good guy.
Yeah,
Miller North guy comes from good stock.
And I was talking about him. He's extremely likable.
Yeah. That's funny, Ravi. I told Bruns, I said, Caden says he's going to call me back in an hour or so for an interview. And Bruns has said he's a Miller North guy. His word is his bond. So
Brunsy knows.
So he was right. Caden called right back about what he said he would. But he was listening to those guys listen, to those press conferences. That's what's interesting. A lot of recruits they listen to Rule's whole deal. I think he's a engaging enough speaker that even the prospects will tune in for a half hour and see what's he talking about this week. And he had that diamonds in the rough quote, and I think he reiterated it to Caden, and I think Jackson Carpenter was the other who was alongside him. And he was just telling those 2 guys, he's like, look, because you guys are here, you're going to be viewed as maybe in that diamonds in the rough category, basically. But basically, we think you're the type of prospect who, if you're playing at Modern Day or wherever, somewhere down at one of those, powerhouse programs, you're like a 4-star guy and you've got 35 offers. That's what we think of your talent. Don't think otherwise for a second. And so I think that that quote, whatever people took from it, it meant something to some guys listening. I can tell you that much, who associated with it and understand what he's talking about there. So that was an interesting perspective to hear somebody who is directly connected to the actual line.
Because you bring up Jackson Carpenter, and I said this when he first said yes, and this is just primarily because I'd seen him up close. We played against him as a sophomore, so I'm just watching him warm up, and I mean, film clearly said he was their guy, and in a more prolific or pass-happy offense in another state, Carpenter's measurables would stack up against anyone. They just would. He's sleek. He can high point a ball. He's tough. He's got a wiry frame. He's fast. There are a lot of things to like about him, and because it's right there in your backyard, 12 miles from campus, it's like, well, hometown. I'm like,
yeah. People assume it's a homer offer.
Yeah, it's got. I mean, his numbers are comparable to anybody else, just not the statistics.
Yeah, you talk about a both sides conversation that happens. It's with a guy like Jackson Carpenter where someone's like, "Oh, that's a hometown offer," and the poo-poos it. And then if a player like that gets, Iowa's on the doorstep knocking or somebody,
Isn't it
and they end
weird?
up,
Why didn't Nebraska offer him?
That's a good one. That's a good one.
so then if they end up going elsewhere,
Or K-State
even
will,
if there's
right?
Yeah.
yeah, or even if there's a dog fight for him, then to get to land them, that conversation becomes like, oh, maybe that offer should have come in a little quicker and all that. So I'm not. This is what comes with fandom and following this stuff. That's part of the deal. But some of those things are pretty interesting. How the tone of the conversation can flip rather quickly, I would say.
You know what will be curious is I think we may have to reevaluate too, because I think sometimes there's this tendency. I do think in 2024 we're more apt to say, okay, Iowa they are tough evaluators, so that offer me. I think we've turned that corner.
Mm-hmm.
We still don't respect it when it's an offensive guy though, because of their offensive prowess. But I do
Unless
think
it's a lineman. We like it when they offer linemen.
I do think we may have to adjust our train of thought with Kansas State,
Mhm.
because quietly those programs are starting to win more than they lose, and they're winning more than we are. So I'm not like, we better be careful, right, about not understanding that these guys are pretty good too. Like if Missouri comes in and makes an offer, it's not, well, it's Missouri. It's no, Missouri
That's
wins
a
a
good
lot,
SEC school.
wins a lot of games.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, I don't know. I just think we have to recalibrate what teams within the region are doing
I
around
mean,
us too.
BC, I'm even to the point where, like, if NDSU or SDSU makes an offer to a guy, I'm like, Nebraska probably needs to be knocking on that door.
Oh yeah, that's another. Yeah, I can see
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I mean, that's a.
I mean,
and
watch
also, though,
South Dakota State play along the D line.
Yeah, that's like I'm
and
not
those
saying
guys those guys are getting drafted.
I'm not saying they have to offer all those guys, but you better make sure.
Yeah, you gotta be on it, and that's the thing where I would say about the staff. I feel like they're doing a thorough evaluation. Where if they haven't offered somebody yet, it's not because it's like they just haven't done the footwork. I think that's the part where I think people should be comforted by. I feel like they're putting in the legwork to learn about guys, and I think there's some prospects even locally who they didn't just walk out of camp or June with a Husker offer yet, and they've been offered other places. But that doesn't mean the story is necessarily over. We're talking about some 26 guys who were told, we just want to see a little bit more of your film into the fall, and then there might be some noise there. So I like that part of it. I do think they put as much intentionality into their camps as they advertise. And I think most prospects walk away believing that to be true. And so that's the key part, is just that fairness process of your routine and how you go about that. And I think most recruits I talk to seem to think they're given a fair shake for the most part. And that hasn't always been the case. So that's a good thing.
So this recruiting profile, while we're on it, seems to include like recruiting like well-rounded young men, right? Like they just don't, like, it's very few grade things. It's just the portfolio seems complete, right? Not just the athletic side when they're doing their due diligence. Something or nothing in my head that this seems like a team that gets along, right? I think it's very understated because most of us aren't around enough, but this team strikes me as a team that gets along very well. And I think there's something to that. There's got to be intentional on Nebraska's part, right? Like recruiting guys and getting guys in the program that fit within the culture.
Yeah, that's something. And I know it always seems like we're pumping the positive when I'm on here, but every recruit I talk to, almost every one of them, talks about family at Nebraska. And if you look around and look at updates at other programs, that's not always the case where that's just like the common go-to line. Like there are certain go-to phrases recruits always use. And like, I think people at this point are kind of worn out. The facilities are unbelievable. Don't get me wrong, but people want more than that line about like, oh, the facilities are shiny. But the thing that is a constant is those guys recruits will say those players, they truly like each other, like you're saying. It feels like a family with the coaches. And the other part of it is there's an expectation that this is going to happen. That is success. And a lot of recruits say there's just like a sort of vibe in the air over there that even though this is a program that hasn't been to a bowl game since 2016, this staff and those players right now are so fired up for this season, and there's just an expectation like, yeah, this thing's going to turn the corner. Do you want to be a part of it or not? Because it's gonna happen. Don't even ask that if it is. So that's what a lot of guys are walking away thinking. And if you can back that up now this season, that is key. Because you can lose that momentum if you throw a 5-7 out there again or something like that. Then people start to get a little nervous about it and be like, okay, there's another one of those. But if they throw 8 wins or something out there and just confirm what sort of these recruits have thought on their visits, I think that can only pick up steam.
We're talking with Brian Christopherson from Husker 24/7. Let me throw a little negativity into the bunch since apparently we're too positive, or some potential negativity. So, as I'm thinking about this in-state,
you don't have to. It's okay.
As I'm thinking about this in-state recruiting process, right, and how they are doing the work, they're putting the work in, they're with the camps and their evaluations and everything like that. There's some guys, like you said, that they're probably still not going to offer that have offers from places like Iowa and Kansas State and maybe Iowa State and other good programs around the area. Do you think the fact that they put in the work gives them some grace with people that they're like, hey, we just didn't think it was a good fit? Or if that guy goes and pops off somewhere else, is it worse because they didn't just miss him? They're just like, he's not good enough, and they missed.
Oh, if a local guy ever goes,
we're gonna have to have one of those as a test, as a case study.
Yeah, because like it could go either way, right?
Yeah.
Right.
That's a good question.
If a local guy ever goes anywhere and gets rolling a bit, you're always going to hear about it every Saturday. I mean, think about like Drew Ott or somebody from Iowa, like in I say recent years. Some of this isn't that recent anymore, but they go over there and they make a play or whatever on a Saturday, and the whole like Twitter would just explode about it. Husker Twitter, like, oh, seeing so and so did this and that. So you're always going to hear about it. And I understand the point. You're saying that is it double emphasis now because we're saying they do such a good job looking at guys and they didn't offer him right away. Yeah, there will be some of that. So you got to live with your evaluations. But part of that is something we talk about a lot on this show is there's just a lot more prospects to choose from, or there always have been, but now other schools are recognizing that in the state of Nebraska. So you are not going to be able to get them all, or it just won't happen that way. There's going to be a few maybe you don't feel quite as strongly about, or they just pick somewhere else. And that's just part of the deal when you have a state that I think has really picked up in how other programs are viewing recruiting it. And, you're just seeing it with, as Damon mentioned, Kansas and Kansas State. Kansas used to be a program.
It's just not those aren't dirty words. Like, they're legit, man.
Kansas used to be a program where if you wrote like, okay, this guy was offered by these 8 schools. Sometimes I admit I'll like write like the bigger schools at the front of that list because those are the ones the guy's in on. And Kansas would have been like 7th or 8th. You can no longer say that anymore. The way they've started to build that program, and definitely not with Kansas State. So it's a different game as far as like, I think there's just better programs closer to Nebraska that feel like they can get in and get a guy or two. And I think there's now a better understanding, man, there's a lot of talent there in a state that really loves football. We got to look into it because Nebraska can't have them all. And especially if there's some roster size change at some point, limit rule, that could impact matters a little bit too on that front.
I just, and to that point, right? I mean, Ty Good went to Notre Dame. Trevor Robinson went to. There are some guys, right, from a long, long time ago where you saw some big name schools, but the last handful of years, probably 6 or so, I'll go back to like 18, 19, where you see Auburn, USC, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Penn State. There are some schools that are making routine stops in the state
Mhm.
now that we're just unaccustomed to seeing. So I think if you kind of buoy the expectation level, at worst, you got to say, there's probably some pretty good players here, right? Like
Yeah, and
the hometown thing. It's nice to say out loud, but it's increasingly difficult.
oh, it is.
You have to win.
Yes, you do. And I mean, to think about it locally, the last 6 or 7 years, it's even harder to recruit locally when you haven't won, because these kids are around. I mean, we talk football in this state on the radio and every podcast, all day long. So these guys hear like everything about the years where it's been 5-7, 4-8, and all the negativity that can come with that, or should come with that, actually. And so, I mean, yeah, there's going to be some of those kids during that era who are going to be like, why am I going to go over there? That's not exactly been a fun ride lately. So it is key this year to make that move that people kind of, I think, are hoping is going to happen, where you put it in front of them and see, yep, they are climbing a rung up the ladder. It's actually true. They've got that guy now, and maybe that changes the dynamic even for a few local guys. You're also going to lose a couple to Iowa here and there, but the other part of that is you might take 2 or 3 from Iowa too. You might take like a Jake Peters or somebody out of that state that you really like. Nebraska right now is trying really hard
Hawthorne,
to take
maybe.
Will Hawthorne right out of Iowa State's backyard, and Iowa State, has got a good head coach too that's respected. So, I mean, if Nebraska wins that one, people should be like, wow. I mean, that would be one where
because he's a huge he comes across as a huge Cyclone fan.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a tough fight because of that. I wouldn't necessarily predict Nebraska, but they gave them a lot to think about. I'll say that much. So, yeah, it goes both ways on that.
Yeah, I think kind of one of my litmus tests is going to be the Dawson Merritt kind of Christian Jones thing, and it's not one against the other, but one's the hometown guy. The one is, for whatever the reason, seems to be sexier, and it kind of it bugs me a little just because we almost know too much about the local guy, so we almost use that against him. And I know it sounds easy. Well, you coach him DB and you're going to defend him. There's just this natural inclination to think that somebody's local, right? And it's there's this kind of this hometown handshake, and I'm like, sometimes these guys are just good, right? Like, it doesn't matter really where they're from. Sometimes they're just good.
It's pressure to recruit locally, and it is there's pressure for a local recruiting target, as you know full well, Damon. I mean, that's another side of it. I admire those kids because it's hard when you're 16 years old and suddenly you got people in the state analyzing
your every move, right?
Yeah. So it's an interesting deal.
That's Brian Christopherson, Husker 24/7 BC. We appreciate it as always. We'll talk to you next week.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, B.